idea is a very simple one, and the Mamba mentality simply means trying to be the best version of yourself.
Most people think the mind breaks under pressure. They're wrong. The mind doesn't break under pressure. It breaks under the absence of a system, long before the pressure ever arrives. You've seen it. Someone with undeniable talent who collapses when it matters most. Someone with every resource, every opportunity, who still finds a way to fall apart at the exact moment they need to hold together. That's not weakness. That's what happens when a mind was never trained to function when everything inside it says stop. The question isn't whether you'll face that moment. You will. The question is whether your mind will have laws to follow when your emotions no longer will. Only one person in modern history turned that answer into a science, and his name was Kobe Bryant. In June 2000, Kobe Bryant was 21 years old. The Los Angeles Lakers were in Game 4 of the NBA Finals against the Indiana Pacers. Kobe had already twisted his ankle badly in the second quarter, the kind of injury that gives most players a legitimate reason to sit down and let the team carry the weight. He didn't sit down. What happened next wasn't a miracle of athleticism. It was something more precise than that. Kobe had already rehearsed this moment, not this specific game, not this specific ankle, but the internal state it demanded. He had rehearsed functioning inside pain. He had rehearsed performing when the body sends signals that contradict everything the mind needs to execute. This wasn't instinct. Kobe had been waking up at 4 a.m. since his teenage years in Lower Merion, Pennsylvania. Not because someone told him to, but because he had made a calculation that most people his age refused to make. While the rest of the world operated on 8 hours in comfort, he was already in the gym by 5 a.m., training in silence before his teammates had opened their eyes. That routine wasn't about physical preparation alone. It was the construction of a system, a set of internal laws that governed how he responded to difficulty, fatigue, doubt, and resistance. By the time he was 21, standing on that court in pain, those laws were already running automatically. He finished the game. The Lakers won. And 3 weeks later, they were NBA champions. But what made that possible had nothing to do with the night itself. What Kobe built wasn't a body that could withstand pressure. It was a mind that had already decided how to perform before the pressure came. There's a version of yourself you already know exists. You felt it, briefly, in flashes, when everything aligned and you operated at a level that surprised even you. You were sharp, clear, unshakable, and then it passed. The problem isn't that you can't reach that level. The problem is that you can't reach it on demand, because you've been treating performance as a feeling instead of a function. When you feel motivated, you perform. When you don't, you negotiate. You tell yourself you'll start when conditions improve, when the pressure is lower, when you're rested, when the timing is right. And so, your highest level becomes something that visits you occasionally, instead of something you operate from consistently. That gap, between who you are when conditions are perfect and who you are when they aren't, is precisely what separates elite performance from average performance. And closing that gap requires something most people are never willing to build. The principle is discipline, but not in the way the word is typically used. Discipline is not willpower. Willpower depletes. Discipline, in its true form, is a system of non-negotiable laws that removes decision-making from the equation entirely. You don't decide whether to act. The law decides for you. The action happens because the system demands it, not because you feel like complying. This is the distinction Kobe understood that most people miss completely. Motivation is a resource, and resources run out. Laws don't. Here's why it works at the level of the brain itself. Every time you act against how you feel, every time the system overrides the emotion, you are reinforcing a neural pathway that strengthens the executive function of the prefrontal cortex. Over time, that pathway becomes dominant. The resistance doesn't disappear. but your capacity to move through it without negotiation grows until the resistance stops being relevant. Think of it this way. The first time you walk into cold water, your body sends every signal available to make you turn back. But if you enter that same water every morning at the same time for 30 days, the signals don't stop. But your relationship to them changes completely. You no longer need to decide. The decision was already made. Kobe's 4 a.m. sessions weren't about the hours. They were about building a mind that had stopped asking the question of whether to show up. By the time Kobe was in his late 20s, his pre-game preparation had become a ritualized architecture. He arrived hours before tip-off, not to warm up the body, but to execute a precise sequence that had been refined over years. Visualization, specific shooting patterns, mental rehearsal of defensive assignments. Each element had a fixed position in the sequence, and none of it was adjusted based on how he felt that day. In documented accounts from teammates and coaches during the Laker dynasty years, the consistent observation wasn't about his talent. It was about his invariance. Kobe on a good day and Kobe on a bad day looked functionally identical in preparation. The laws didn't flex. In 2013, Kobe Bryant tore his Achilles tendon in the final minutes of a regular season game. He was 34 years old. He had already been managing knee tendonitis and other injuries accumulated over 17 years of professional basketball. After the surgery, his recovery timeline was publicly estimated at 6 to 9 months. And privately, many in the league assumed his level of play would never return to what it had been. What followed was not an immediate triumph. Kobe documented periods of profound frustration during the rehabilitation process. Moments when the body refused to respond, when the system he had built for 17 years had no physical platform to run on. In interviews during that period, he acknowledged the psychological weight of relearning movement that had once been automatic. The discipline here wasn't about pushing harder. It was about applying the same non-negotiable law to recovery that he had applied to training. Showing up to every therapy session with the same invariance he had brought to every pregame ritual, even when the progress was invisible. He returned to the court in December 2013. Not fully, but according to the system. The law didn't break. It simply found a new surface to run on. But this wasn't limited to one moment in Kobe's life. The same principle showed up again, in a completely different context. And the pattern it reveals is impossible to ignore. When Kobe Bryant retired from basketball in April 2016, after scoring 60 points in his final game at 37 years old, most people assumed that the chapter of extreme discipline had served its purpose. The career was over. The laws that govern training at 4 a.m., the pre-game rituals, the relentless refinement of physical craft, all of it belonged to basketball now. What happened next revealed something more fundamental about the man. Within months of retirement, Kobe had begun applying the same architecture of discipline to an entirely different domain: storytelling. He founded Granity Studios and committed himself to mastering the craft of writing and filmmaking with the same methodical intensity he had brought to basketball. He studied the structure of narrative the way he had once studied defensive schemes. He broke down screenwriting into components and rehearsed them. He sought out mentors in the creative world and absorbed their frameworks with the same precision he had once applied to studying opponents on film. In 2018, his animated short film Dear Basketball, written entirely by Kobe based on a poem he had composed, won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't the residual fame of an athlete applying his brand to a side project. It was the same system running on new material. What makes this significant isn't the Oscar. It's what the transition reveals about the nature of the laws he had built. These weren't basketball laws. They were cognitive laws, governing how he approached mastery in any domain. The specific skill was interchangeable. The system beneath it was not. Kobe said in interviews during that period that he approached storytelling the way he approached the game, by identifying the fundamentals, obsessing over them until they were automatic, and then building complexity on top of that foundation. The vocabulary was different. The architecture was identical. This is what separates a discipline that is built around a goal from a discipline that is built around a system. Goals end. Systems don't. When basketball was gone, Kobe didn't lose his structure. He relocated it. And that relocation happened without hesitation, without a transitional period of searching for identity, because the identity was never built on basketball. It was built on the laws. The sport had simply been one arena in which those laws operated. The same mind that was in the gym at 4 a.m. in 1999 was at a writing desk, studying narrative structure in 2016. Different craft, same law. Now that you understand what this principle is, how Kobe lived it, and why it showed up in every chapter of his life, the real question is what you do with it starting today. Don't build a system of 10 habits. Build one law first. A single action tied to your most important goal that happens at the same time, in the same way, regardless of how you feel. Not a goal, a law. The difference is that a goal is something you pursue when conditions allow. A law is something that executes whether conditions allow or not. Write it down in the form of a rule. Every day at time, I do action. No negotiation, no exception. Start with 7 days of 0 exceptions. That's where the neural pathway begins. Every moment of resistance you experience before acting is a moment when the brain is still treating the action as optional. Kobe's 4 a.m. sessions stopped being optional the moment he stopped evaluating them. So, identify the exact point in your routine where resistance typically appears, and pre-decide what happens there. Write the response before the resistance arrives. When I feel like skipping, I do the first 5 minutes anyway. You don't fight resistance. You make the decision before it shows up. Once your law is stable in one area of your life, deliberately transfer the same system to a different domain. The way Kobe transferred his basketball discipline to storytelling. This is the test that reveals whether you've built a real system or just a habit tied to one context. Take the same time structure, the same non-negotiable consistency, and apply it to a skill you've been developing slowly. Watch what happens when the system stops depending on the domain. If you want to go deeper into everything we covered today, one book changed the way I understand performance completely. The Mamba Mentality by Kobe Bryant. I'll leave the link in the description. The mind that never quits isn't born that way. It's legislated. One non-negotiable law at a time, repeated until the question of whether to continue stops being a question at all. Kobe didn't build an unbreakable mind because he was exceptional. He built it because he understood something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Freedom isn't the absence of discipline. It's what discipline eventually becomes. If this is the kind of content that makes you think differently, subscribe and hit the like button. It's the simplest way to help this channel grow and reach people who need to hear this. What's the one law you know your mind needs, but you've been treating as optional? Drop it in the comments. Making it concrete is how it starts to become real. See you in the next one.
Have a good time. Enjoy life. It's life is too short to get bogged down, to be discouraged, or you have to keep moving. You have to keep going. Put one foot in front of the other, smile, and just keep on rolling. And that's what really this camp is about.